The winter of 1894 had no mercy for the high plains of Wyoming. The snow came heavy, driven by winds that screamed across the open country like some vengeful spirit. Drifts piled high against the sagging fences, and cattle froze where they stood, their hides crusted in ice. It was the kind of winter that made a man believe the land itself wanted him gone. John Mercer, a rancher with more scars than friends, rode out at first light, the grey sky pressing low above him. His horse labored through knee-deep powder, each breath a ghostly plume. He wasn't out for cattle today, nor fence lines. Something else had drawn him from the warmth of his small cabin and into the white wilderness. The night before, while feeding his stock, he thought he'd heard it. A sound carried on the wind. Not wolves, not the crack of ice. A voice, faint, broken, a woman's voice carried through the storm. Mercer had told himself it was just the wind playing tricks on a weary man, but lying in bed staring at the rafters while the fire died low, he couldn't shake it. By dawn, he had saddled his horse and turned it toward the canyon rim, where the land broke and fell away into the timber. The ride was slow, brutal, his coat crusted with snow, gloves stiffening at the fingers. More than once he thought of turning back, but each time the memory of that voice pressed him forward. A sound like that didn't come from nothing. By midday, he reached the edge of the canyon. Snow swirled in great blinding sheets, masking everything but the closest trees. He dismounted, leading his horse carefully along the rim. The silence was complete. No birds, no wind now, only the eerie, muffling weight of the storm. Then he saw it. A shape, half hidden in the snow, collapsed among the roots of a fallen pine. At first he thought it was just another drift, but the closer he came, the clearer it was. A woman. Her body covered in white, her dress stiff with ice. One arm lay stretched out, half buried, the fingers clawed as if she'd tried to drag herself forward before the storm claimed her. Mercer dropped to his knees beside her, brushing snow from her face with a rough, shaking hand. Her lips were blue, lashes crusted with frost. For a heartbeat, he feared he was too late. Then, faint, so faint he almost missed it. Her chest stirred. She was alive. John Mercer let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Alive, but just barely. He brushed the snow from her hair, strands of it stiff with ice, and pressed his gloved fingers against her neck. A pulse fluttered weakly beneath the skin, so faint it almost seemed like the storm might steal it away at any moment. "Easy now," he muttered, his voice rough against the silence. "You're still here." He stripped off his heavy wool gloves and cupped her face in bare hands, the cold biting him instantly. Her skin was like stone, lips trembling with the faintest ghost of breath. She needed warmth, and she needed it fast. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his thick sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her small frame, tucking it tight under her chin. The bulk of it swallowed her, but even that wasn't enough. She needed fire, shelter, something more than the indifferent mercy of snow and wind. His horse, a dun gelding named Bristle, stamped nervously a few paces away, as if aware of the fragile life stretched across the ground. Mercer glanced at the canyon walls. He couldn't carry her all the way home, not with the storm thickening. He needed a closer refuge. He knew of a place, a trapper's lean-to he'd stumbled on years back, half collapsed but still standing beneath a shelf of rock. If it still held, it would give them at least a fighting chance. Mercer slid his arms beneath her, startled by how light she was. Lighter, that, and she ought to be. Her head fell limply against his chest as he rose, and for a moment he feared she might already be gone. But then came the soft, shallow hitch of breath against his shirt. That small sound drove him on. The walk to the lean-to felt longer than any trail he'd ridden in his life. Snow clung to his beard, his lashes turned every step into a battle. He stumbled once, nearly went to his knees, but tightened his hold around her and forced himself upright. When he finally reached the shelter, relief cut through the exhaustion like a knife. The old structure leaned badly, its timbers weathered and grey, but it stood. More importantly, it offered a pocket of still air and enough cover to build a fire. Mercer laid her gently on a bed of pine needles left behind by some long-gone hunter. He stripped kindling from the dry underside of the lean-to, his fingers stiff and clumsy, and struck flint until sparks leapt. The first curl of flame caught, small and stubborn, and he fed it until it grew into a blaze that hissed and snapped in the dark. The fire's glow spilled across her pale face, catching the faintest hint of color returning to her lips. Mercer leaned close, holding his hands over the flames, then pressing them to her chilled skin. "You're not done," he said softly, his voice more plea than statement. "Not tonight. Not here." For the first time she stirred. The faintest sound, a broken whisper that didn't quite form a word. Her eyes fluttered, struggling against the weight of snow and silence. Mercer bent closer, listening, every nerve alive. The fire crackled low, throwing shadows that danced across the crooked timbers of the old lean-to. Outside, the storm pressed hard against the canyon walls, but in here there was at least a small pocket of warmth. Mercer crouched close, watching her chest rise and fall in shallow breaths, each one a fragile tether to life. Her eyelids fluttered again. This time they opened just enough for him to catch the faintest shimmer of her gaze. Pale, lost, unfocused. For a long moment, she seemed caught, between waking and slipping back into the dark. "Easy now," Mercer said quietly, his voice meant to steady more than comfort. "You're safe. Just stay with me." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She swallowed, the effort visible in her throat, and then tried again. A rasp of air escaped, barely a whisper, but enough for him to hear. "Don't leave me." Mercer froze, the words cutting sharper than the wind outside. He leaned closer, his rough hands trembling as he adjusted the coat more tightly around her. "I won't," he promised, the vow slipping out before he had time to think. "You're not alone now." Her eyes slid shut again, but not before a faint crease formed at her brow, as if some memory pressed at the edges of her mind. Something too heavy to name. She winced, a soft whimper escaping as though the thought itself hurt more than the cold. Mercer reached for his canteen, shaking it. The water inside was half frozen, but it would have to do. He tilted her head carefully, trickling a few drops onto her cracked lips. She flinched at first, then drank weakly, each swallow sounding louder in the silence than the fire itself. "That's it," he murmured, "one step at a time." The flames licked higher, warming the cramped shelter. Mercer sat back on his heels, his eyes never leaving her. Questions pressed against his thoughts. Who was she? What brought her out into this wilderness alone? And what kind of cruelty left her lying half-buried in the snow to die? She shifted suddenly, a shiver racking her thin frame. He moved closer, steadying her shoulders until the tremor eased. Then came another whisper, broken and raw, but clear enough to chill him deeper than any storm. "They wanted me gone." The words faded into silence, but their weight lingered. Mercer's jaw tightened. Whoever they were, they hadn't counted on her being found, and as long as she still drew breath, he knew he couldn't walk away from her fate. He fed more kindling to the fire, eyes hard in the flickering light. Outside the wind roared like a pack of wolves, but inside the lean-to, one truth settled over him like iron. This was no accident, and whatever trail she had run from, or been driven from, it wasn't finished with her yet. The storm didn't let up by morning. The canyon was buried in white, drifts piled so high that the trail Mercer had ridden in on was gone, erased as though no man had ever crossed it. He'd hardly slept, his back pressed to the wall of the lean-to while he kept the fire alive through the night. Every time the flames burned low, he'd stirred, added more wood, and checked her breathing. Fragile, uneven, but steady. She clung to life the way a lantern clings to flame in the wind. By the pale grey light of dawn, Mercer tried to rouse her again. He pressed his hand lightly to her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Her head shifted, eyes fluttering open for just a moment. Her lips moved, cracked and pale. He leaned down close to catch the words. "Where am I?" "In a canyon shack," he said, voice low but steady. "Storm hit last night. You're safe now. Her gaze tried to focus on him, but she blinked slowly, dazed, as if each thought had to be pulled through a wall of fog. "Safe," she repeated, and then a bitter edge crept in, almost a laugh, but too hollow to hold shape. "There's no safe." Mercer's stomach sank at the words. He had heard that kind of tone before, years ago, in men driven too hard by war or women running from something they never dared to speak of. He reached for the canteen again, lifting her head gently so she could sip. She drank, weakly but gratefully, and when he set her back against the folded blanket, her hand lingered on his wrist. "They'll find me," she whispered, the fear trembling out of her. "They always do." Mercer's jaw tightened. "Who?" he asked. But she only closed her eyes, breath hitching, and shook her head as if even naming them would bring danger down upon her. The fire popped, Filwars, in the silence between them. Mercer leaned back, running a hand over his beard. He hadn't asked for this. He was a rancher, a drifter when the cattle season slowed, a man who minded his own trail. But something about her words, about the way she clutched at the scraps of life like a creature half broken, struck too deep. Leaving her wasn't an option anymore, not for him. He stepped outside, bracing against the sting of the cold. His horse, tethered under the eave, stamped its hooves impatiently. The world was blanketed in snow so heavy that no tracks remained, no sign of her trail or who might have left her. He looked back toward the lean-to. Whoever she was, she hadn't stumbled out here by chance. Someone had meant for her not to rise again. When he re-entered, her eyes were half open, watching him, and this time, before he could ask again, she spoke. "Don't take me back there," she said, her voice breaking with dread. "Please, I'd rather die here." Mercer crouched, meeting her eyes. "I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go," he said. "But I need to know who left you to freeze." Her lips trembled. She drew in a sharp breath, as though steeling herself to say the words that had weighed her down. Mercer felt the word settle heavy in the shack. Family. It was spoken not with warmth, but with a kind of broken edge, as if it had been turned into something sharp and cruel. He stayed crouched beside her, his hand steady on the floor, though every muscle wanted to press her for more. But he'd learned patience the hard way, on the trail, and in darker years before that. A wounded thing would bolt if cornered. Sometimes, silence did more than questions. The fire cracked, wind keened faintly against the canyon walls. She turned her face away, as if ashamed even to have said it, her hand pulled weakly at the blanket, trying to hide her trembling. Mercer let the quiet stretch before he spoke again. His voice was low, gravelly, but not unkind. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever they did, whatever they meant for you, you're out of their hands now." Her lips moved, dry and cracked, but she didn't answer. Instead, tears welled in her eyes, carving pale lines down her dirt-streaked cheeks. She bit them back hard, as though the act of weeping itself was a weakness she couldn't afford. Mercer reached into his saddlebag and pulled free a strip of jerky, softened it a moment in warm water from the pot, then broke it in half. He held it out. "Try. It'll help you." She stared at it as if it were some kind of offering from another world. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitant, and took it. She nibbled, every chew an effort, but after a few moments, she swallowed. Color touched her cheeks faintly. Her shoulders eased against the blanket. "Why'd they leave you out there?" Mercer asked at last, not sharp, but firm enough that the question wouldn't be mistaken for passing talk. Her breath hitched. She shook her head. "Because I sang." The words puzzled him. His brow furrowed. "Sang." She nodded once, almost ashamed. "At night, in the cabin. Just songs my mama taught me." Her eyes grew distant, unfocused. "They said it wasn't right, said it stirred things, said I was cursed, calling something into the house." Mercer's gut tightened. He'd heard plenty of strange superstitions out on the frontier. Folks out here could turn scripture into a whip, twist fear into a shackle. She swallowed hard. Her voice broke again. They tied me outside once. Said if the cold didn't kill the curse, then maybe I'd learn. But I sang again. I couldn't stop. It's the only thing that kept me from going mad. Her hands clutched at the blanket. Last night they dragged me out farther. Said this time the snow could have me. Her voice cracked into silence, nothing left but the sound of her breathing, ragged and thin. Mercer felt something burn low in his chest, not just anger, but something older, more dangerous. He had no kin of his own, no tie. But the trail, but the thought of kin turning on their own blood, of leaving her buried in snow for a voice lifted in song, settled like fire in his veins. He leaned back, steadied himself. "They won't find you again," he said, flat and certain. Her eyes flicked to his face, searching, doubting, but also desperate for something to believe in. Morning broke pale and thin, the sky a bleached stretch of grey that pressed low over the canyon. Snow had crusted along the windowsill during the night, and Mercer knew it was only a matter of time before the trail out became treacherous. He crouched near the fire, stirring the embers back into flame, listening to her breathing. It was steadier now, though still shallow, each breath like a fragile thread. She hadn't stirred much, save for a few soft murmurs in her sleep, half-sung notes, hushed like echoes of the songs that had nearly cost her life. Mercer set his jaw. Staying here wasn't safe. A lone cabin in a canyon was easy to track, and if her family or the ones who claimed to be her family came hunting, they'd find her again. He packed quickly, methodical in the way a man who'd lived too long on the move did everything. Rope coiled, rifle checked, canteen filled with melted snow. Then he moved to her side. Her eyes fluttered open, hazy with the weakness of someone pulled back from the edge. "It's morning," she whispered. "Close enough," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "We can't stay. Too easy to be found here. I'll carry you till you can stand." Fear flashed across her face, as if the thought of moving through the snow brought back too much of what she'd endured. "They'll come," she breathed. "They always come." Mercer shook his head. "Let 'em. I've seen worse than a pack of cowards who'd freeze their own blood. They won't touch you again." He bundled her tighter in the blood, Ankette, then lifted her as he had the night before. She was light, too light, as if the canyon wind could strip her away if he wasn't careful. He stepped outside, the cold striking him sharp, and adjust, her against his chest. The world beyond the shack was endless white, broken only by dark streaks of stone and pine clinging to the canyon slopes. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Each step sank deep, but he pushed forward, his breath billowing in clouds. Her face pressed into his shoulder. He thought she'd fallen asleep, but after a long while, he felt her whisper against him, weak but steady. "They'll say I brought it on myself, that I drew the cold with my songs." Mercer tightened his hold. "Then let 'em sing their own lies. You just keep your breath for living." She gave the faintest sound, half laugh, half sob, and let herself rest against him. The canyon narrowed ahead, the walls rising, snow-drifted and silent. But in the quiet, Mercer's instincts prickled, a track in the snow, not fresh but not old either. Someone had passed through here not long ago. He shifted her weight and moved slower, every sense sharp. The storm might have hidden their trail, but if others were close, carrying her wouldn't be as simple as outrunning the cold. And for the first time since he'd found her, Mercer realized saving her from the snow might be the easier part. Keeping her safe from the hands that had left her there, that was the fight still waiting up ahead.